All right, welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive.
Glad to be here.
This time we're picking up where we left off in the book of Exodus.
Yeah, lots to uncover still.
Remember all that drama back in Egypt? The plagues, Passover, that epic Red Sea crossing?
Oh, absolutely. That was a pretty spectacular start to the story.
Right. We saw God's power on full display as he rescued the Israelites from slavery.
No doubt about it. But Exodus Part 2 takes us in a bit of a different direction.
Does it? Okay, so what's the focus this time around?
It's less about physical freedom and more about building a relationship. It's like the Israelites have been rescued, but then what?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. Now what? What happens next?
That's the big question at the heart of this section. It's about establishing a covenant.
A covenant, okay.
Yeah, like a binding agreement between God and his people.
Right.
And this covenant, it's meant to be more than just, a set of rules.
I see.
It's about laying the foundation for a deep, lasting connection.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So where does this covenant take place?
We're heading to Mount Sinai.
Mount Sinai. Okay, so we're talking dramatic scenery, right?
Oh, you guessed it. Clouds, lightning, thunder.
Wow, that sounds intense. No pressure for the Israelites, huh?
Well, that's where things get interesting. You see, this covenant isn't just about God rescuing the Israelites.
What?
It's about inviting them into a unique role, a kingdom of priests.
A kingdom of priests. Now, that's a phrase that needs some unpacking. What does that even mean in practical terms?
So think of it this way. The Israelites were meant to be a model nation, reflecting God's character and laws to the surrounding world.
Oh, yeah?
They were chosen to showcase, what it looks like to live in a just and righteous society, a stark contrast to the surrounding nations.
So they're like ambassadors showing others a different way of life.
Exactly. And the terms of this covenant are designed to shape them into that kind of nation.
Okay, so how does that happen? What shapes them into that kind of nation?
Well, it starts with the Ten Commandments.
Okay, yeah, the foundational principles.
Yeah, their relationship with God, but it goes far beyond those 10 basic rules.
Oh, really? Okay, you've got me hooked. What kind of laws are we talking about here?
Well, these additional laws cover everything from social justice to personal purity.
Wow.
They address how to treat the poor, how to handle disputes, even how to observe religious festivals. These laws were meant to, to set them apart, to create a society that honored God and cared for its people.
It sounds like God was trying to establish a whole new way of life for the Israelites, like a radical departure from the norms of the ancient world.
Absolutely. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. Remember what happened back in the Garden of Eden?
Humanity messed up big time.
Right. And access to God's presence was lost. And now God is establishing a way for his presence to dwell among his people again.
And this is where the tabernacle comes in.
This is where the tabernacle comes in.
Ah, yes, the tabernacle. It's more than just a fancy tent, right?
Much more. Think of it as a portable Eden, a symbol of restored intimacy with God. It had a courtyard, an outer room, and an inner room called the Most Holy Place, where the Ark of the Covenant was kept.
And the Ark contained the Ten Commandments, right?
Right.
So the tabernacle was a physical representation of God dwelling among his people.
Precisely. And all those details about its construction, the gold, the jewels, the intricate designs, they weren't just random decorations.
I see.
They were meant to echo the beauty and splendor of the Garden of Eden, pointing back to God's desire for closeness and relationship.
This is all so rich with symbolism and meaning. It sounds like everything was falling into place. God establishes a covenant, provides detailed laws, even sets up a dwelling place among his people.
You'd think so, right?
What could possibly go wrong?
Well, that's where the story takes a dramatic turn. Just as God is revealing the blueprint for the tabernacle to Moses up on the mountain, something goes terribly wrong down at the camp.
Oh no, what happens? Do the Israelites start complaining again?
It's actually much worse than complaining this time. Remember how they were supposed to be patient, trust God's plan?
Yeah.
Well, they decide they can't wait any longer.
Oh, no.
They get impatient and start looking for something tangible to worship.
This doesn't sound good.
It's not good at all. They turn to Moses' brother, Aaron, and demand that he make them a god.
They demand he make them a god.
And what does he come up with? A golden calf.
A golden calf. Seriously, it seems almost comical given all the incredible things they've already witnessed.
It does, doesn't it? But this seemingly ridiculous act has devastating consequences. Remember those 10 commandments that were just given to them with all that thunder and lightning?
Right.
They've just broken the first two in a spectacular fashion.
Wow. That's a pretty blatant act of disobedience.
Yeah.
I can't imagine God was too pleased about this.
You're right about that. God is furious. And rightfully so. He even considers wiping out the entire nation and starting over.
Whoa, that's intense. But doesn't Moses step in and try to reason with God?
He does. Moses, once again, becomes the intercessor.
Okay.
He pleads with God to remember his promises to Abraham and his reputation among the nations.
So what happens? Does God relent?
Here's where we see the amazing tension between God's justice and his mercy. He's angry about their disobedience, but he also remembers his covenant faithfulness.
Nice.
He chooses to forgive the nation as a whole, though there are consequences for those who led the rebellion.
It's a powerful reminder that God is both holy and compassionate. He upholds his standards, but he also extends grace to those who fall short.
Exactly. And this is where God reveals something profound about his character. He describes himself to Moses as merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in covenant faithfulness.
That's a powerful statement. It tells us so much about who God is at his core.
It does, and it sets the stage for the rest of the story. Despite the setback, God instructs Moses to go ahead and build the tabernacle according to his detailed plans.
So even though the Israelites messed up big time, God is still committed to dwelling among them.
Yes. The tabernacle construction is described in meticulous detail, emphasizing the care and precision involved. It takes 5 whole chapters to outline the process.
Wow, that's a lot of attention to detail. So finally, the tabernacle is finished, and God's presence descends upon it. You'd think this would be the happy ending, right?
Well, this is Exodus, so of course there's a twist.
There's a twist. Okay, what now?
Moses goes to enter the tabernacle, but he can't.
He can't. Why not? What's stopping him from entering God's presence?
That's the cliffhanger that Exodus Part 2 leaves us with. The golden calf incident, it wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment.
Okay.
It revealed a deeper issue. The Israelites' sin has damaged their relationship with God, creating a barrier between them and his holiness.
So even though God forgave them, there are still consequences for their actions.
Exactly. It's a sobering reminder that our choices have lasting impacts, even when we experience God's grace.
This is getting really interesting. So where do we go from here? What does this all mean for the future of the covenant?
That's what we'll explore in the next part of our deep dive. Stay tuned.
So we left off with this big cliffhanger. Moses can't enter the tabernacle. What's the takeaway here?
It's a powerful image, isn't it? Even though God has forgiven the Israelites, their sin has created this distance, between them and his holiness. It's like there's this invisible barrier preventing true intimacy.
It makes you think, doesn't it, about the weight of our own choices. Even when we receive God's grace, there can still be consequences.
Absolutely. And it raises some pretty profound questions about the future of the covenant. Remember, God's plan was for the Israelites to be a kingdom of priests, a model nation showcasing his character to the world.
Right. But if they can't even enter God's presence in the tabernacle, how are they supposed to represent him to others?
That's the million-dollar question. It seems like this grand vision has hit a major snag.
It's like they've been given this incredible mission, but haven't quite grasped the implications of their own brokenness.
And yet, here's the amazing thing. God doesn't give up on them. He doesn't abandon the covenant or withdraw his presence entirely.
That's pretty remarkable when you think about it. It would have been easy for God to say, all right, that's it, I'm done.
Right.
But instead, he chooses to remain engaged, to continue working towards his purposes despite their failures.
It's a testament to his, unwavering faithfulness and commitment to the promises he made to Abraham.
So where do we go from here? Does Exodus leave us hanging with this unresolved tension?
It does in a way, but that's what makes it so compelling. Exodus isn't a neat and tidy story with all the loose ends tied up.
Right.
It's an honest portrayal of the messy reality of human sin and God's relentless grace.
I'm starting to see why this book has resonated with people for centuries. It's not just a historical account.
Right.
It's a reflection of our own struggles and God's persistent pursuit of us.
Exactly. And I think that's a key takeaway for us today. Exodus reminds us that even when we mess up, even when we fail to live up to our calling, God doesn't give up on us.
He's still working to restore what's been broken, to bridge the gap between our sinfulness and his holiness. And that's a message worth holding on to, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's a message of hope, a reminder that God's story with humanity isn't over yet.
So what does this all mean for us as we step away from Exodus and move forward in the biblical narrative? What questions should we be pondering?
I think the biggest question is this. How does God ultimately reconcile his holiness with our sinfulness? Exodus shows us the problem, but it doesn't provide the full solution.
It's like we've been given the first few chapters of a much larger story, a story that continues to unfold throughout the rest of Scripture.
And I think it's safe to say that the themes we've explored in Exodus, covenant, presence, sacrifice, forgiveness, will continue to play a central role in that narrative.
Wow, we've really journeyed through this intense part of Exodus, haven't we?
We have.
From that mountaintop covenant to, oh man, that golden calf debacle. It feels like we just went through a roller coaster of emotions.
Yeah, Exodus, it really highlights the complexities, I guess you could say, of a relationship with God. We see his faithfulness, his mercy, his justice.
Right, right.
And then we also see how human brokenness kind of disrupts that, that ideal.
Yeah, and this whole idea of the Israelites being a kingdom of priests is so fascinating, but it seems like they stumbled right out of the gate.
Well, what's interesting is that, failure doesn't negate God's plan.
It doesn't.
No. In fact, it almost becomes like part of the story. It reveals this need for something more.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Something to like bridge that gap between humanity and holiness.
Right. Yeah, that makes you wonder how all this unfolds, in the bigger narrative of the Bible. Does God eventually find a way to reconcile this whole tension?
That's the beauty of Scripture. It's a story of, unfolding revelation. Exodus kind of sets the stage, but it doesn't necessarily give us all the answers.
Right.
It invites us to, to keep searching, keep digging deeper.
And I think that's a powerful message for us even today. We may not have all the answers, but we can trust that God is working.
Right.
He's still pursuing that relationship with us, even in all our messiness.
One thing that Exodus makes really clear is that God is a God of covenant. He's committed to his promises even when we fall short. And that's a truth worth clinging to.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that we're not, defined by our failures. God's grace is bigger than our mistakes.
So much bigger.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Exodus Part 2, let's carry with us these key takeaways, the power of covenant, the weight of our choices, and the boundless depths of God's mercy.
Definitely.
It's been a really rich exploration, and I'm so excited to see how this story continues to unfold. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been great having you here.
Thanks for having me. Always a pleasure to dive into these rich stories together.
Absolutely. And until next time, everyone, keep exploring the Scriptures and keep seeking the heart of God revealed in its pages. We'll see you on our next deep dive.